So it's recording now. And I just hit broadcast. So we're just, okay, I'm gonna mute myself and attendees are joining now.
Okay, great.
Fantastic.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait a couple of minutes before we start today's program. We just want to make sure that, a couple more people will be signing in before we start. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Again, we'll be starting in a couple minutes. It's okay. Good morning. We'll be starting soon. Good morning, everyone. We're going to start the program. Thank you all for joining us today. And today's program is Innovations That Stick, How Businesses Are Adapting to the COVID Economy and Beyond. My name is Darlene Chu Bryant. I'm the Executive Director of Global SF. We are a nonprofit dedicated to making San Francisco a global resilient city, and we partner with the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development to identify and attract businesses to San Francisco and the Bay Area while helping local businesses go global. For that matter, we're also an SBDC affiliate, a small business development center, so the SBA and the state of California support our work, helping small businesses develop, grow, and thrive. We have region-targeted initiatives, China SF, Latin SF, and SF Asia. And for more information and to stay in touch, please check out our website at www.globalsf.biz. Before I start the program, there is always housekeeping items. Please note that today's webinar is going to be recorded, so if you missed anything, there will be an opportunity to visit our website and rewind. Following our conversation, we will also be opening up to questions from the audience, so please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen. Questions in the chat section will not be answered during the program. I repeat, if you have questions for our guest speaker today, please type them into the Q&A section. After today's program, each one of you will also be receiving an email from us to provide you with contact information and the opportunity to work with a Stripe consultant directly. You can also send an email to office-hours@stripe.com. And now for the program. We are going to have a very informative program that will help small businesses and entrepreneurs kick off or pivot their businesses. Whether B2B or B2C, there is something for all of you today. We have all learned to pivot and adapt more quickly and necessary with today's unprecedented times. COVID has changed so much of how we live, work, play, and do business. To talk about why and how to make the pivot, I'm delighted to have a very good friend, Lauren Dye from Stripe here today. Lauren is Partnerships Manager at Stripe. She leads the partnerships for Stripe Checkout and collaborates with technology leaders such as Apple and Google, to bring commerce products to market. Lauren is passionate about empowering entrepreneurs and works closely with platforms and software providers that support small businesses such as Xero and Invoice2Go. Lauren is also the co-founder of GenDream, which seeds young leaders with the relationships and entrepreneurial skills needed to collaborate on problems facing the global community. She has worked in Beijing, New York, and San Francisco now to help bridge borders and encourage international expansion. Lauren actually has an economics degree from Harvard University, you will see soon. She is definitely a smart cookie. Welcome, Lauren.
Thank you, Darlene. That was a very flattering introduction. And I'm really excited to be with the Global SF community today because I know that all of you business owners and entrepreneurs out there are really on the cutting edge of what commerce is. I'm going to quickly just share my screen, so bear with me for one moment while I do that. All right. And as Darlene mentioned, I am lucky to be at Stripe, where I get to interact with businesses from all over the world who are very innovative. And what I want to share with you today is 3 stories of businesses who I've been following and really admire, and how they've actually adapted their business for online, not only as a stopgap to COVID, but also to discover new markets that they hadn't tapped into before. And my goal for all of you is that these stories will inspire you to think about how you can actually adapt your business for online, not only to during this moment with coronavirus, but also how you can expand and tap into these new segments over the long term. So the first story I want to share with all of you today is about a business called Zyco. And Zyco is actually a pretty young business. So they were founded about a year ago in Japan, and they are based in Tokyo. What Zyco does is that they help concerts sell tickets. You can imagine that they had a pretty tough time about March when shelter in place started around the world, because concerts in person weren't really a thing anymore. What's really interesting about Zyco is that they, as a team, started brainstorming how could they adapt during this moment. And one of the ideas that came up for them was, well, if we can't have concerts in person, what if we did live stream concerts? And they actually built this tooling to sell tickets for live stream concerts and host these live stream concerts over one weekend. And they were able to launch it on the next Tuesday. I'm going to just play a quick video so that you can hear directly from the founder about the results of that experiment. What really stood out to me about Zyco's story is that they were forced to discover this untapped customer segment of streamers, these customers who were somewhere in between people who go to concerts and people who are listening to Spotify because of COVID. But the really important thing is that this market of streamers is actually not a temporary market. It's a market that was out there that they hadn't tapped into, and actually turned out to be a much larger market, more lucrative, and profitable for them. The really interesting thing is that they're also thinking about how they can actually build new business lines on top of this new customer segment. So for instance, one of the ideas that the Zyco team have is how can they turn this idea of online streaming into almost like a Netflix for artists. So the idea is that artists could create their own online fan club using Zycos technology, and fans could subscribe and pay monthly to stream content from these artists. Pretty cool, right? So my key takeaway for all of us as business owners and entrepreneurs is, as we think about adapting for online, think about how you can create the Netflix for your business. What's really cool about online is that you can reach, as Zyco did, a much larger group of customers. And you also have the ability to actually have an ongoing subscription relationship with these customers. The second story I want to share with all of you is about a Chinese restaurant chain called Junzi, which is based in New York City. And Junzi is really cool because the founder, Yong, is actually from China originally. And he's been paying attention to the coronavirus crisis for quite some time now, actually since about mid-January when it started to really become serious in China. Because of his relationships and his family in China, he's been able to tap into what's going on over there and really focus on what are businesses in China doing to adapt to COVID and how are they looking to expand in this moment. And he's been taking those insights and applying them to his own business based here in the US. One of those insights is actually live streaming, and specifically live streaming for commerce. So to give you a little flavor of what this looks like in China, I want to just play a quick video.
Lauren, can we make sure that the audio works? I think the audio was not working earlier.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yeah, so let's just make sure.
Got it. Let me just quickly, good call out, Darlene. I believe that what I need to do is reshare my screen so that I share a computer sound.
Got it.
Okay, let's try this again. Please let us know if it doesn't work.
Thank you.
China loves live streamers. People spend hours watching others sing, play games, or eat. And they spend lots of money to tip them, making this a big business. But the country's rising stars in live streaming aren't gamers or stylish influencers, they're farmers.
大家好，大家好，我们现在是在一个大山上面，跟大家进行一个就是一个直播。我们主要这个直播间，它是一个主要卖一个原产地的一个新鲜水果的一个直播间。
John's stream isn't for fun, it's a business. He's showing off his fruits to sell them.
我给你看一下这个水分啊，水分好多水分，哇！
There are thousands of streamers like Zhong in China's rural areas. They're taking.
So interesting that these farmers can actually live stream from a hilltop in Hunan province to sell to consumers in cities like Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong. And what Yong has done in learning about how live stream commerce works in China is really adapt that to his business in New York City. So Junzi actually has a distance dining option that they deliver their creations to your home every Friday. And what's really cool is that each of these creations has a real story behind it. So for example, one of the recent ones they did was a Puerto Rican Chinese food distance dining. And they will pair their delivery of food to you with a Instagram live stream. Through this Instagram live stream, they actually tell you the story behind the food and the creation, and they show you how to make it. And really importantly, they show you how to plate it so that you can have some Instagrammable photos afterwards. So I think the key lesson from Yong's story is really to pay attention to what's going on internationally, because a lot of these innovations that are happening abroad are actually ones that could be adapted to the US as well. And Yong is really interesting because he is constantly on the phone and talking to his friend who operates the Yunhai Yao restaurant chain in Beijing, and very much learning about what's going on in Beijing, how are you adapting, how are you looking to expand during this moment, and what can I do to bring those lessons back to New York City and the US as I think about expanding Junzi. The final story I want to share with all of you today is about a user of ours called LogoMaster. And LogoMaster, as you can probably guess from the name, what they do is they create logos for other businesses. So LogoMaster is actually based in Hong Kong, but they sell internationally to places like the Netherlands. What's really interesting is that during COVID, about March, they were actually able to increase their sales to Dutch customers by 35%. And what's interesting is that they did this all without investing anything in marketing. The key insight that LogoMaster had was that just like we here in the US prefer to pay with credit cards online, and in China, people prefer to pay with Alipay or WeChat Pay, in the Netherlands, they also have a way that they prefer to pay online, and that's this somewhat funky looking payment method called iDEAL here. And what they did was they actually worked with Stripe on a partnership to pilot iDEAL as a new payment method in their checkout form. What's really cool is that when a Dutch customer actually goes to LogoMaster's page and they go and check out, if we can detect that they're from the Netherlands, we'll actually automatically surface iDEAL as the primary payment method that these customers can use. And this resulted in a very large increase in number of customers from the Netherlands who were browsing, who actually converted, which then translated into that 35% increase in sales. The cool part is that for LogoMaster, because they had already integrated Stripe Checkout, there was nothing that they had to do on their end. All they really saw was, okay, we have this over-the-air update from Stripe to push this new payment method called iDEAL. And now our customers from the Netherlands can shop in whatever local method they like to usually pay with online. Pretty cool, right? So what I want to do now, and we can experiment with this, is to do a little bit of brainstorming with all of you on the line today about what are some of these tweaks that you can make in order to really increase your online sales to international countries. Like this very small tweak that LogoMaster made in just changing the payment method that was presented to their Dutch customers could actually increase their sales pretty meaningfully. And so I want to open it up to the Q&A channel, and Darlene and team, feel free to jump in here to just brainstorm. Let's say that you want to sell to Japan. What are some ways that you could actually tweak your business or the way that you present yourself in order to go borderless? Anyone have ideas? Please post it in the Q&A channel.
To all our participants, just remember, you can post in the Q&A channel if you would like to participate in this exercise. We want to be interactive and we want to be inclusive with all our participants today. Should be a two-way program.
I can start seeding the conversation if it's helpful. So one pretty easy thing, well, it's not easy necessarily, but one kind of thing that you can help to localize your presence in another country is to translate the content on your website. So how can you localize the language, for example?
Somebody also suggested to boost your social media presence in Facebook and IG Live.
Yeah, that's a great idea, to really look into what are the marketing channels in these other countries, right? So for example, in Japan, what is the primary social media channel there? And how can you start creating a presence through that channel?
Create partnerships with local brands.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, so potentially partnering almost like JV style with the local brand to see how you can potentially use their supply chain or potentially partner on a co-branding, for example.
And so I don't know if this question or comment is for this particular section, but questions about opening a bank account, a Bank of China account.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really relevant question because when you are selling internationally, sometimes you could sell internationally with foreign exchange, for example, and use your US bank account, but a lot of companies actually choose to create their own local entity as well, and that helps them avoid some of these foreign exchange fees, for example, or cross-border fees.
So I think one question is, especially with the foreign currency controls in China, one question, or I'm seeing a few questions about collecting money in different currencies and particularly repatriating RMB back to the US. Is that a question, that's an issue, or is there a solution for that with using Stripe?
That's a really good question. We actually have users in Hong Kong who are essentially selling in Hong Kong, but at the moment we don't necessarily have ways that you could repatriate RMB into the US, but you could sell to consumers in China and essentially have the funds go into your US bank account.
So Stripe then supports Alipay and WeChat Pay, because you mentioned that a lot of the companies are taking WeChat Pay and Alipay. Does that mean Stripe is supporting companies to interact with WeChat and Alipay?
That's right. And really what our vision is that wherever your customer is based, they typically have a payment method that they actually prefer to pay in. So oftentimes in Asia, that could be Alipay or WeChat Pay. Or if you're selling to Chinese tourists, for example, who are traveling in Europe or Southeast Asia or the US, that often is their preferred way to pay. And what we want to do is make it really easy for businesses to sell in that payment method, and ideally not do any other additional work in order to activate this payment method. It just comes out of the box with Stripe.
Great.
Awesome. So I think we had a couple of pretty good ideas in terms of what it could take to go borderless in your business. And maybe I'll just share a couple other ones that come to mind for me. So we talked a little bit about localizing or translating your website content. LogoMaster is a great example of how you can sell with local payment methods, and local currency is also really important here. The other thing to think about is how you're going to collect local taxes. And then what are ways that you can access global shipping providers? So the UPSs and the FedExes of the world internationally. And what I want to really emphasize is that you probably already have the data that you need to think about how you can make these tweaks to increase your sales internationally. So for instance, you could take a look at what countries are you seeing a lot of traffic to your website from? And how does that compare to your sales from that country? So for instance, if you're seeing a lot of traffic from Japan to your website, but not as many sales or revenue, that's probably an area to focus on and think about what are some of the tweaks I can make, whether it's selling in local currency or selling in local payment methods, that could actually make a big difference in my sales there. All right, so before we move into Q&A, I want to quickly recap some of the key lessons that we've learned from these businesses that we're following. So from Zyco, we learned that when you're adapting your business for online, there's actually a lot of advantages. You might be able to reach a larger audience that you hadn't tapped into before. And what's really cool is you could potentially have an ongoing subscription relationship with this audience. And so what I really want to encourage everyone to think about is there a Netflix for X in your business? And can you start experimenting with that right now? The other takeaway is really from Junzi, which is pay attention to what's going on internationally in places like China, in places like Europe, because a lot of these entrepreneurs are adapting very rapidly to what's going on in their local market. And some of their innovations might actually be really relevant to how you can expand in the US. And I think the global SF audience is very much ripe for this, given all of you are very internationally connected. And the last thing is to really think about what are some of those countries that you could potentially make a small tweak on, whether it's a payment method or a currency, in order to increase your sales pretty meaningfully. And start to make a list of what are those tweaks that you can make in order to change and localize your business so that you can start selling to these countries and really expand your business there. So I hope that all of these stories have inspired you to think about how we can transition from surviving, as you can see on the left here, to thriving, as Junzi and some of these other businesses are doing now. And I want to take some time during our Q&A to really brainstorm with everyone on the audience about how you can do that for your business. And also we'll be sending out a link afterwards to everyone who's attended and registered, so that if you want to sign up for a one-on-one office hour with Stripe, we'd love to do that as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I definitely learned a lot. You know, thinking about starting our own business, don't know, but working with Global SF, we can definitely help our clients, you know, think about e-commerce, think about different payment methods, and definitely going global with Stripe. So thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing with us today. Let's start off with some questions. I'm going to kick it off with a couple questions that I have, and then we hope to see more questions coming in from our participants today. Again, type your questions into the Q&A box and I'll be reading them off. But one question I'd like to post is, we are seeing incredible innovation here in San Francisco, being the center of innovation. For example, a female founded a company we're working with called Redmond is launching a physical brick and mortar urban wellness center in June. They are now selling products on their website and offering live virtual sessions. We're actually hosting the first one on Monday, the 25th. We have seen so many solutions in the wellness space specifically pivot to online platforms. In terms of consumer trends that will stick, what are the most interesting overall trends you are seeing globally?
That's a really good question, and also super cool to hear about Redmond. I quickly looked at their website while you were chatting, Darlene, and it looks really awesome.
They're amazing. Yes.
I'd say in terms of consumer trends, I would think about really two things. So one is the subscription trend right now, and the other is closely related to that, which is installments. So how can you buy things on installments? And consumer is, in terms of subscriptions, it's very interesting because, for instance, with Psycho, right? They realize that they can have an ongoing relationship with this concert goer online through maybe like a Netflix style subscription to an artist's fan club. And that's a really good example of how a business is actually increasing their revenue by having this ongoing relationship. I would also even point to examples like, for instance, all of you probably know Victoria's Secret. They were really focused on mostly just one-time sales, but there are a lot of businesses out there that have adapted to a subscription model in the space. So for instance, Adore Me is a lingerie online provider that's a Stripe customer. And they are really cool because what they've done to blow up in the past couple of years has really been, they've actually been selling lingerie boxes. And so here's a way that you can really hopefully retain customers, but also increase your sales over time.
That's great to know.
Maybe I'll just speak a little bit to the installment payment option,
Please.
which I think is something very interesting going on in the consumer world right now. So any of you who shopped online may have noticed recently that there's a lot of options for installments. So you probably see things like Affirm, or if you're in Europe, you probably see Klarna. If you're in Australia, you probably see Afterpay. And there's a lot of these options to actually help consumers pay for something like a couch or a mattress that is a bit more high ticket without actually really paying any interest oftentimes. So typically what's happening right now is that you get this way to pay in 4 installments, let's say. So if it's a $100 purchase, the consumer can pay $25 in 4 increments. And what we're seeing and why this is becoming so popular is 2 reasons. So one is that merchants are seeing that this is actually converting consumers better. And the reason that consumers are adopting this is a lot of young people actually don't really feel comfortable with credit, and they feel much more comfortable paying for things rather than really borrowing, or at least conceptually. And so that's really why these installment payment plans have taken on this huge amount of growth lately. And what I would encourage is for everyone on the call who has a business or is an entrepreneur to start to look into that.
And Stripe will also help walk them through, right? You understand?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good. Second question, thank you for sharing. Second question I have is for businesses expanding internationally, what are the questions that they should ask themselves beforehand when they're thinking about it? What should they really internally think about to see whether or not they're ready to take that step?
International is really exciting. I really mention also that you want to be thoughtful about how you expand internationally. So just to give an example, let's say that you're a business based here in the US and you're selling lotions for tanning, for example. And let's say that you notice, okay, the market in Asia is really large. So why don't I go and expand into Asia with my tanning lotions? Well, you might realize that in Asia, people don't really want to get tan. They actually want whiteners, so skin whiteners. And you might find that you don't actually have a market there. So number one thing is to really ask yourself, okay, do I have a market in this country or region? And if so, what is my competitive advantage? The really interesting thing is that you probably already have the data to tell you where your business is interesting. So back to our conversation about LogoMaster and going international, you probably can see from your Google Analytics data, for instance, where traffic is coming internationally, which countries traffic is coming to your website from. And you can actually see where there might be a lot of carts abandoned or where your sales actually don't match up with the number of views that you're getting from that country. And so what I would do is actually focus on that data first that you already have and compare, okay, which countries, is it Japan, is it the UK, is it Canada that I'm getting a lot of traffic from, where a lot of these customers aren't converting? And then really focus on honing in there to understand, okay, what tweaks can I make to increase my sales there?
Okay. And then since at first you were talking about, installment options, that retailers or sellers are offering now. A question came up where does Stripe have an escrow option for international product purchases? That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. Let me follow up on that. Okay. I honestly don't know, but that's a really interesting question. I'd be curious to know what the use case is.
Okay. So we will get back to you, Michael, with an answer to your question, okay? Let's see, I have some more questions to throw at you. Oh, we have more questions coming in from the public as well. How does Stripe remove roadblocks then to global sales? Because you want to create, you want to make it easy for businesses to go global.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I know a lot of the folks on this webinar, because of the global SF community, are really interested in selling internationally. And I would say payments is definitely one part of it. There's many other parts to selling internationally, like, for example, localizing your website content. But I can speak a little bit to the payment side of things. And so, going back to the story about LogoMaster, what is really interesting is that every country has their own types of payment methods that people prefer to pay with. So for instance, if you're selling in Japan, for instance, there's payment methods like Konbini. If you're selling in Netherlands, we talked about a payment method called Ideal. In Asia, for example, nowadays, Alipay, WeChat Pay, GrabPay are popular. In places like Latin America, you've got Boletos, for instance. And so one of the angles that Stripe is really looking to simplify and help our businesses and our users with is, how can we enable you to actually sell in whatever, not only local currency, that's kind of step one, but also the actual payment method that is preferred by the customer in that country. Because the reality is that if I'm a customer from, let's say I'm shopping in the Netherlands and all I see is credit card, I'm not necessarily going to be as likely to purchase from you if I see something that I'm used to paying with in my local market.
Right. So not just dealing with payment methods, but then also managing different platforms, right? Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so the other thing that I think is really important to keep in mind is that what Stripe is really focused on as well is simplifying how easy it is to create an account in a given country. And so there's a really interesting story that we recently were told in Southeast Asia, where there was a business of ours that was based in our business that was based in Malaysia that wanted to expand into Singapore, and they were able to essentially create a Stripe account and start processing payments in Singapore within 17 minutes, which is pretty incredible.
That's great. So a question came up, and what is your take on the newly released Facebook Shop?
I would say Facebook and Google Shopping and a lot of these social media channels are really, really important for online commerce. And we see a lot of our businesses actually essentially link their inventory, for example, to these different channels. So I would say Facebook is a great channel for selling online, and especially in countries where Facebook is extremely popular. For instance, in Southeast Asia, in Japan, they're very popular. And I would say really take advantage of these different social media channels to not only sell on your website, but also through Facebook and Google Shopping and these other, whether it's Amazon and other marketplaces out there.
Okay, that was, I think, one question that was asked too. Let me see what other questions we have. Stripe is known for being developer friendly. And what about non-technical founders? How does Stripe help them set up?
That is such a good question, and actually something that I'm really passionate about, because I myself am non-technical, and so I myself have been asking this question. And one trend that's really interesting is on the business side is that there's really an explosion of these vertical software platforms is what you can call it essentially, that are specifically serving non-technical users, business owners who want to sell online or in person. And Shopify is a really good example of this. They were kind of one of the first in the space where they found out that retail, they could actually create a product that was tailored to retailers. There's many other verticals out there, including, for example, massage. For example, there's actually a company called a Massage Book that enables people who are masseuses, right, to sell their services. And what you can do is basically these software platforms like Massage Book actually provide end-to-end servicing, where they will literally will spin up a website for you. You can actually, for example, have people book a slot with you on your calendar for when they're going to get a massage through Massage Book's website. They'll help you create your brand presence. They'll help you with things like selling gift cards online. And all of this is really end-to-end, and it's specific to your business. I can probably name about 15 other similar types of services out there. So for instance, what's another good one? There is Zenati is one that serves spas. There's House Call Pro and Jobber. They serve plumbers and construction workers. And really each of these pieces of software is tailored for your particular industry and involves no coding.
A question about going global, because you mentioned earlier, and we all know that there's so many different payment platforms and payment methods. Every single country has their own, preferred mode of payment. What would you recommend to a local founder who's thinking of going global? And what do you recommend in terms of payments infrastructure then? I mean, it seems so complicated out there. How do you get them started?
I want to just go back to the Logomaster story because I think this is really key, which is it's a lot of work to try and sell in all of these different currencies and all of these different payment methods. And our goal at Stripe is really to do that work for you. And so, for example, LogoMaster is using a hosted checkout page from Stripe called Stripe Checkout. And basically what this means is that whenever Stripe adds a new payment method like Ideal to that page, we will optimize it for you such that, for example, we'll take into account things like IP address and the browser language of the customer who is shopping on your site, and actually surface the right payment method based on that information. And what's really key here is that there's actually no work involved from the business's perspective. So LogoMaster didn't have to do any work to get this new payment method Ideal. So something that kind of like how Tesla does over-the-air updates, this was literally like an over-the-air update from Stripe. And because we pushed this update and LogoMaster was one of the first in this pilot, they were able to really pretty amazingly quickly see some results with a 35% increase in sales. And so my recommendation to business owners out there is to start simple, right? Over time, you may want to customize more and more, but I would encourage you to look at something that's kind of out of the box, right? Whether it's like a Shopify type solution or a Massage Books type solution, or something like Stripe Checkout, which just gives you the toolkit that you need. Because the reality is that you're probably not wanting to invest your team's time or engineering resources on these payment methods, for instance, but Stripe has a team of thousands, really, just spending all of our time thinking about this for you.
It's great. So, you know, we've been talking a lot about trends and different payment methods, but the thing is that what do you think and what have you seen? Or what are the most interesting customer behavioral trends that you're seeing right now around payments that generate trust that you think will stick?
Yeah, trust is a really good question, because ultimately what's interesting about online is that it's different than in person, right? There's not necessarily that same, I know who Darlene is, and so I trust her. And I think this is partially my personal opinion, but ultimately with building trust online, design is a key factor in that. And the design of your website is going to be key in communicating to the customers who are visiting it for the first time or doing a Google search. So for example, recently I was trying to send my mom flowers for Mother's Day. So I did a Google search of how can I send a live plant to her? And I looked at a couple of websites, and some of them really stood out as being very clean, very polished design, and also just really clean checkout experiences, to be honest. And being a payments nerd, that was something that I noticed, of course. And other sites that I browsed were really tough. They were really hard to kind of go through, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have a good product to offer. Doesn't mean they don't have a good, plant to send my mom. But it did impact my trust in their ability to get that plant to her on time on Mother's Day. And so what I would really encourage is for everybody to take a look at the data that you have on your website right now, and take a look at the traffic data. See where customers are falling off, and that could be where you have a gap in trust or a gap in understanding of them.
So the most important thing is spend time in developing a very good user-friendly website, right? The experience is important, yeah.
Exactly.
So do you have any comments about using digital tokens for payments with Stripe? Is Stripe considering that? And because this is relevant to the use of blockchain technology. I kind of think that blockchain relates to everything, but.
The blockchain of everything, right?
Yeah. What is your comments on that?
I would not say I'm a blockchain expert. However, there definitely are purchases that are happening over cryptocurrency. So for instance, Bitcoin is probably the most popular one out there. And we actually did support Bitcoin as a method of payment for a while at Stripe.
Okay.
What we noticed actually a few years ago, we noticed that the uptake wasn't very meaningful. And so we actually stopped supporting that because we just weren't really seeing Bitcoin being used as a means of commerce. We were seeing people, of course, using Bitcoin to, potentially save. So like kind of just how you might use gold, but it wasn't something that was really popular in terms of commerce, which is why we didn't necessarily continue to invest in it. It's always something that we're looking into though. And so I would say, stay tuned and we'll come back to you with more ideas here.
Good to know. And so what's next for Stripe? I mean, we see that Stripe is starting to expand globally and pretty rapidly. So what's next? I think we all want to hear.
It's funny because I think what's next for Stripe is also similar to what's next for probably every business owner and entrepreneur on this webinar today, which is international expansion. And we, today we're in 30 something countries, and our goal is to be in close to 100 countries by end of year. And this is something that is an ongoing project for us, is how can we expand, help our businesses sell into more countries, and also how can we make sure that that experience is really, really localized?
So I'd really rather have questions in the Q&A section instead of chat, but a question and comment did come in, and that is, San Francisco has many unique small businesses. Any advice can you give to them to operate and thrive in the COVID world?
What's interesting is that when we're thinking about this new world of online is kind of a cool place to be, right? Because there's not really, there's just so many users who are online these days. I think the last stat I saw was maybe about 3 billion people are online. And so that's kind of your audience, right? So like for Zyco, for instance, their audience used to be a couple hundred people who could go to a Sero concert in person in Japan. But now their audience is potentially that 3 billion people who have internet. And so I think for small businesses in SF, what is interesting is that your story is unique, and what people are craving these days is meaning, especially in this current situation where meaning is really what we can have to hold on to. So I'll just give a really small personal example, which is that recently a friend sent me a gift box that was from Oregon. Wow. And it was because I helped her boyfriend actually move out remotely. He was kind of directing me to help him move from San Francisco. And he's actually from Portland, Oregon. And my friend sent me this gift box to thank me for helping him move. And inside were these chocolates, these peanut butter chocolate barks from Oregon. Wow. And a candle from Oregon. And what was so touching about it was that the story of, I want to send you something from my hometown to thank you for what you've been able to help me with. And I think that's really what's special about our businesses here in San Francisco, is that you have your own local unique story, and people in different cities in the US, but also abroad, want to hear that. And they want to know about you, right? So like, there's a reason that people want to buy lobster from Boston, right? Or they want to buy like cherries from Washington. It's because there's a local story there. And so I would really focus on that.
So, and expanding on that, San Francisco, in my mind, it has also been like the mecca for food, right? Anybody who loves to eat, and especially and living in the Bay Area, everybody flocks to San Francisco. So what do you think, these changes, these unprecedented times, how do restaurants pivot? What does this mean for restaurants now?
Yeah. Restaurants are definitely my personal passion as well, because I am a foodie. And so this is partially why Junzi was so interesting to me. So with restaurants, I think it's really tough, because even you can look to China and see what's happening there, right? Which is that even when restaurants are opening up again, the capacity that you can have is still going to be much lower than it was before. So for instance, in China, what they're doing is they're actually putting X marks on kind of every other table that you cannot sit at that table to essentially maintain social distancing. So that's probably what we're going to be looking at for the US as well. And what I would really encourage all the restaurant owners out there to think about is, what are ways that you don't necessarily have to keep this kind of like in restaurant seating model, right? You can actually change your model up and maybe make it more efficient for this new audience, right? So I want to just give an example from Junzi, which I thought was really smart, is they used to be, so their prior segment that they were serving before COVID was mostly people like you and I who are working in these cities like New York, and we're coming out for a lunch break. So potentially people who are buying just for themselves. And what they noticed is that the behavior of how consumers were buying during COVID was very different, where they actually want to buy in bulk because they don't want to interact with delivery people that frequently. And they also want to buy for themselves, but also their family and maybe their roommates as well. And so they actually adapted their model to focus on almost like family meals, where you can actually package a bunch of different, you can package in more bulk versus a single serving, a bunch of different types of dishes. And they made it very refrigerator friendly, where you can leave it in your refrigerator and you can actually combine the sauce and the food later on in order to make sure that it's still fresh when you eat it, you know, like 2 days later, right? And the sauce didn't make your food all soggy. So what I would say is to restaurant owners is think about what is the behavior of consumers going to look like, and look to places like China that are already here in a month, maybe 6 months, right? Because this could go on for quite some time, given vaccine still needs to be developed. And so think about what that's going to look like in 6 to 12 months, and don't feel stuck to your prior model. Think about how you can change your model, whether that's removing seating, making it easier for people to line up and do takeout in your store, integrating to online services like DoorDash or Uber Eats or Grubhub, and maybe thinking about how you can even adopt your menu to serve people who are going to want to be eating at home more often.
Yeah, I've even seen one of my favorite restaurants is China Life, and I'm seeing that they're offering banquet meals now, right? Essentially party packs for to go or even delivery. So it's good to see that restaurants are starting to pivot that way, right? To your point. One question, you've mentioned Japan, China as markets to watch. Where else are you seeing some innovative models that can be adopted here or that you can share with our audience?
That's a really good one. I am constantly trying to look to international regions for interesting ideas. And I would say, I think one of the most interesting regions to me right now is actually Southeast Asia. And I'm lucky that I have family there. My brother lives there. And so I have a little bit of a ear on the ground in what's going on there. Also, our Stripe office in Southeast Asia is based in Singapore. And what's really interesting in Southeast Asia, I think, is that you're seeing a lot of these apps, like, for example, Grab, which is effectively Uber of Southeast Asia. You're seeing a lot of these apps actually adapt to being the one-stop shop for a consumer, right? So if you're a consumer, you're using Grab to not only order your taxi, so to speak, but you're also using it to pay for things. So literally, Grab recently developed a payment method called GrabPay. And this is something that people could actually pay for, not only things from Grab, but also from other retailers out there. And I think that's a really interesting trend to watch, is what are some of these innovative tech companies doing in places like Southeast Asia? How are they grabbing market share? Especially in a world which is, for instance, for Grab, Southeast Asia is a place where cash is pretty dominant still. And so how are they thinking about grabbing market share in this somewhat white space? And I think those are similar questions that we can ask ourselves as we are looking to lessons from these innovators and thinking about how that applies to our business.
And thank you for that, Lee, because actually Global SF, we are planning a program that is taking place in June with 2 speakers, one from Open Table and another one from Grab. So our audience here, if you would like to talk to our speakers that day, please join us. Stay tuned. We have the program coming up in June. So, you know, sign up with us for updates and you'll know, oh, sorry. The event is taking place June 11th, so please stay tuned and register for the event so you can ask questions exactly what Lauren just mentioned. So Lauren, I also, another question came up and, you know, you've been sharing all these great ideas, innovative ideas coming out of China for the small businesses out there who want to see what's going on in China. You know, what is the best medium to go to? Which platform should they go on to look for these ideas?
Yeah, so depends on the language that you are following in, but I'm gonna assume that most of our audience here is more English language oriented. So I would suggest a couple of news outlets. So one that I follow is Abacus. That was where that video from the live stream farmers came from. Another one is Alibaba actually has a pretty good feed that is actually run by a friend of mine. So a little bit of a plug there. Okay. But they actually write a lot of content about what's going on in China, especially around commerce. And so that's something that you can follow directly from the source.
Okay, and everyone, it's abacusnews.com, and you'll see the link to it in the chat box. Do we have any other questions?
The other thing I'd encourage is if you don't have a WeChat account yet, set up a WeChat account and start getting involved with some of these. There's a lot of groups that actually are talking about the latest trends in China and in Asia and these WeChat groups. And so I definitely encourage you to start to explore that social media channel too. Great.
So everybody, make sure you have a WeChat account if you want to learn what's going on in China, but a lot of other countries are starting to use it too. And I think that, is there anything, and I think that's all the questions we have for now. Lauren, do you have some closing remarks you'd like to make?
I want to thank you, Darlene and Laura, for hosting me and the whole Global SF team. There was so much work that goes into hosting one of these. And also thank you everyone for bearing with all the different technical glitches. Hope you were inspired by the stories of these businesses, Zyco and Logomaster and Junzi, because I really am. And I really want to encourage all of you to, after this presentation and this conversation, go back and think about what are some of those experiments you can run in your own business. And if you want to brainstorm more, I'm really happy to chat. And I know the rest of our team at Stripe is. So I think Darlene and team will send out the link for office hours with us afterwards as well.
Yes, we definitely will. Thank you so much, Lauren, and your colleagues at Stripe to help us facilitate today's conversation. Again, to the audience, this webinar or today's program has been recorded. It will be available on our website following today's program. And if you'd like to contact Lauren or any of her team members, there is the email address there that you can contact and send an email to set up an appointment. If you would like to find out more information about Global SF, visit us at globalsf.biz or send us an email, info@globalsf.biz. And we can also help you and your business grow, understand the market that you want to target, and make sure that you're connected with Stripe so they can help you collect payment, because payments generate revenue and helps you grow, helps you thrive, so you can expand into more countries overseas. And with that, I want to say again, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you had a good time. Lauren, thank you. You're such a good speaker.
Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah, and this was fun. And I look forward to seeing everyone on June 11th. Okay, thank you and have a good day.
Take care, everyone.